There comes a moment in life when silence becomes louder than arguments, distance becomes stronger than control, and peace becomes more powerful than persuasion. This is the moment when a narcissist realizes something irreversible has happened. Not that they lost access to you, but that they lost authority over you. This realization does not arrive through confrontation. It arrives through absence. Today's message is about what truly happens when a narcissist realizes they have already lost you. And more importantly, what it reveals about your growth, your healing, and your elevation. Loss is not felt when you leave. It is felt when you no longer react. This is one of the most misunderstood truths about narcissistic dynamics. And understanding it will free many people from confusion, guilt, and false responsibility. When you physically leave a narcissist, they often appear calm, dismissive, or even relieved. This leads many to believe they were never important. But that interpretation is incorrect. The narcissist does not register loss through absence. They register loss through the end of emotional supply. As long as you react, explain, argue, defend, cry, or seek closure, you are still present in their internal world. Your body may be gone, but your energy is still available, and availability is what sustains their sense of power. Reaction is the currency of control. Every emotional response reassures the narcissist that they still have access to you, that they can still provoke you into engagement, that they still matter enough to disturb your inner state. This is why arguments never resolve anything with a narcissist. The goal is never understanding. The goal is stimulation. As long as you react, the connection remains intact, even if it is painful. From their perspective, pain is preferable to indifference, because pain confirms relevance. When you stop reacting, something far more serious happens than when you leave. Silence removes feedback. Calm removes leverage. Emotional neutrality removes identity reinforcement. A narcissist builds their sense of self externally, not internally. They do not ask, "Who am I?" They ask, "How am I being perceived?" When your reactions end, the mirror disappears. And without a mirror, they are left alone with an unregulated, fragile inner world they have spent their entire lives avoiding. This is why no reaction is often met with escalation. They may provoke, accuse, bait, flatter, or suddenly remember everything they love about you. These behaviors are not signs of growth or awakening. They are symptoms of withdrawal. The narcissist is experiencing the loss of emotional regulation that your reactions once provided. Your calm becomes intolerable because it highlights their chaos. Your composure exposes their instability without you saying a word. Educationally speaking, this is the moment where power dynamics reverse. Not because you dominate them, but because you exit the game entirely. Narcissistic control depends on participation. You do not defeat manipulation by arguing better. You defeat it by becoming uninterested. When you no longer feel the need to correct their lies, explain your intentions, or prove your goodness, you reclaim authorship over your reality. And authorship is something a narcissist cannot steal. Many people struggle at this stage because they confuse non-reaction with weakness or avoidance. In truth, non-reaction is emotional mastery. It means you have learned that your nervous system does not need to respond to every stimulus. It means you understand that not every accusation deserves a defense, and not every misunderstanding deserves clarification. This level of restraint does not come from apathy. It comes from wisdom. When a narcissist realizes you no longer react, they understand something irreversible has occurred. You are no longer emotionally accessible. And emotional inaccessibility is the one boundary they cannot cross. They may still talk about you, distort your story, or attempt to provoke you indirectly, but internally they know the truth. The door that once opened with a reaction is now sealed with self-control. This is where true loss is felt. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, because they are forced to face a reality where they no longer influence you. And influence was the only proof of importance they ever knew. Your lack of reaction is not silence. It is resolution. It is the moment you chose peace over performance, self-respect over explanation, and growth over engagement. And in that moment, without confrontation or announcement, the narcissist realizes they have already lost you, not because you walked away, but because you took yourself back. When control collapses because purpose awakens, something far deeper than a relationship shift is taking place. This is not merely about leaving a narcissist. This is about an internal awakening where your life finally comes back under your own governance. Control only works on people who are disconnected from purpose. The moment you reconnect with why you exist, control has nothing left to attach to. A narcissist thrives on confusion, emotional fog, and misplaced responsibility. As long as you were unsure of your worth, your direction, or your right to say no, they could position themselves as central to your life. But purpose is disruptive. Purpose reorganizes priorities. Purpose clarifies boundaries. Purpose asks questions that manipulation cannot answer. And once purpose awakens in you, control does not just weaken, it becomes irrelevant. When your purpose awakens, you no longer ask, how do I keep the peace? You begin to ask, does this align with who I am becoming? That single question dismantles control systems built on fear, guilt, obligation, and emotional debt. Control demands compliance. Purpose demands alignment. And alignment cannot be forced. This is why narcissists struggle the most with people who grow. Growth exposes the fact that control was never strength. It was dependency disguised as authority. When you awaken to purpose, you stop negotiating your identity. You stop shrinking your voice to make someone else feel powerful. You stop over-explaining decisions that are rooted in self-respect. And the narcissist feels this shift immediately, even if nothing has been spoken. Purpose creates internal leadership. And leadership terrifies manipulators. Because leaders are self-directed. You begin to move with intention instead of reaction. You stop living to manage someone else's emotions. You stop making choices based on how they might respond. And in that moment, control has lost its leverage. Because leverage only works when someone fears the consequences of disobedience. Here is the critical educational truth. Control collapses not when you confront the narcissist, but when you outgrow the need to be understood by them. Purpose does not require validation. Purpose does not wait for permission. Purpose does not argue its case. It moves forward whether it is applauded or opposed. And when you embody purpose, you no longer orbit around the narcissist's moods, expectations, or narratives. This is when they begin to sense loss, not because you announced independence, but because they can no longer steer your emotional direction. Your decisions become calmer. Your tone becomes steadier. Your explanations become shorter. Your energy becomes self-contained. And this is deeply unsettling to someone who once controlled the emotional climate of your life. Purpose also changes how you interpret pain. Instead of asking, why are they doing this to me? You begin to ask, what is this teaching me about myself? That shift removes the narcissist from the center of the story. They become a chapter, not the author. A lesson, not the destination. And when control realizes it is no longer central, it collapses under its own weight. Another thing happens when purpose awakens. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You recognize that chaos was never passion, and volatility was never love. Purpose brings clarity, and clarity dismantles emotional addiction. What once felt magnetic now feels misaligned. What once felt powerful now feels draining. And the narcissist cannot compete with peace, because peace does not respond to provocation. Understand this deeply. Narcissistic control survives on emotional access. Purpose closes unnecessary access points, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You become selective. You guard your time. You protect your mental space. You stop leaking energy into places that do not nurture growth. And control, having lost access, begins to panic. But this panic is not your responsibility. Purpose does not apologize for choosing growth. Purpose does not explain itself to insecurity. Purpose does not stay small to make others comfortable. When you awaken to purpose, you give yourself permission to evolve, and evolution always disrupts systems built on stagnation. This is why the narcissist feels powerless when you awaken. Not because you became aggressive, but because you became anchored. Not because you fought back, but because you stopped being movable. Purpose makes you internally stable, and instability is the only environment where manipulation thrives. So when control collapses as purpose awakens, recognize what is really happening. You are no longer available for roles that diminish you. You are no longer reachable through guilt or fear. You are no longer predictable through emotional triggers. You have stepped into self-leadership. And once a person governs themselves, no external control can survive. When silence enters your life, it does not arrive empty. It arrives full of truth, full of boundaries, full of self-respect. Silence is not the absence of words, it is the presence of clarity. And when a narcissist realizes you have become silent, not withdrawn, not confused, not waiting, but settled, something deeply unsettling happens inside them. Because arguments once gave them leverage, explanations once gave them access, emotions once gave them power. Silence gives them nothing. And when there is nothing to pull from you, nothing to provoke, nothing to twist, their insecurity stands fully exposed. A narcissist depends on reaction, the way fire depends on oxygen. They provoke to feel powerful, accuse to feel superior, confused to feel intelligent, and destabilized to feel in control. Your emotional engagement was never a conversation to them. It was fuel. The moment that fuel disappears, they are forced to sit with themselves. And that is the one place they have spent their entire life avoiding. Silence removes the stage, turns off the spotlight, and leaves them alone with an identity that cannot exist without an audience. This is why silence unsettles them more than confrontation ever did. When you argued, they still mattered. When you explained, they still had access. When you cried, they still had influence. But when you became quiet, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but out of peace, you removed their ability to define the narrative. Silence exposes insecurity, because insecurity needs noise to hide. It needs chaos to feel important. It needs emotional storms to feel alive. Your silence tells a truth they cannot control, that you no longer need them to understand you in order to understand yourself, that you no longer need them to validate your reality in order to trust it, that you no longer need closure from the very person who caused the wound. And this realization shakes them, because they built their sense of importance on being needed, even if that need was unhealthy. In silence, they begin to project. They assume you are plotting, because that is what they would do. They assume you are bitter, because that is what they feel. They assume you are hurting, because they cannot imagine peace without control. Silence becomes a mirror, and for the first time, they are forced to look without distortion. And what they see is not strength, it is emptiness. Silence educates without speaking. It teaches that boundaries do not require announcements. It teaches that healing does not need witnesses. It teaches that power does not need to prove itself. When you stop explaining, you are not being rude. You are being resolved. When you stop defending, you are not losing. You are choosing peace over performance. When you stop reacting, you are not weak. You are free. This is where the narcissist begins to unravel internally. Not because they lost you physically, but because they lost emotional jurisdiction. They no longer know where they stand with you, and uncertainty terrifies them. Control thrives on predictability. Manipulation thrives on access. Silence removes both. It leaves them guessing, and guessing reminds them that they were never as powerful as they pretended to be. Your silence also does something sacred. It restores your authority. It returns your emotional energy back to its rightful owner. You stop leaking yourself into conversations that lead nowhere. You stop investing in explanations that will never be honored. You stop auditioning for understanding from someone committed to misunderstanding you. Silence becomes self-respect in motion. And here is the deepest truth. Silence does not punish them. It protects you. It creates space for your nervous system to heal, for your identity to stabilize, for your vision to expand. While they are busy trying to interpret your quiet, you are busy rebuilding your life. While they are replaying old moments to feel relevant, you are creating new ones without them. Silence marks the moment you stop trying to be heard by someone who benefits from not hearing you. It marks the moment you realize that your peace is more valuable than being right, and your future is more important than winning arguments rooted in dysfunction. When a narcissist realizes they can no longer reach you, not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually, they feel exposed, because the silence is saying what words never could. You no longer define me. And once that truth is spoken through your actions, not your mouth, the power dynamic is permanently changed. You did not become silent because you had nothing to say. You became silent because you finally said everything that mattered to yourself. When a narcissist measures worth by access rather than value, everything about how they relate to people becomes transactional. They do not ask, who is this person becoming? They ask, how much access do I still have? Access to your emotions, your reactions, your time, your explanations, your energy in their internal world, Access equals importance. The moment access is reduced, they interpret it not as a boundary, but as an existential threat. This is why losing you is not experienced as loss of love, but as loss of supply, loss of control, loss of relevance. This is where education is necessary, because many people misunderstand what is happening at this stage. When you withdraw access, the narcissist does not suddenly realize your worth in a healthy way. Instead, they experience confusion because their measurement system is broken. They have spent their entire life believing that if someone is valuable, they will remain available. When you become unavailable while becoming stronger, calmer, and more self-directed, you expose a flaw in their belief system. You prove that value can exist without permission, approval, or proximity. This is why a narcissist often escalates behavior when they sense access slipping away. They may suddenly become kinder, more attentive, or more apologetic. Or they may become crueler, more dismissive, or more provocative. Both responses come from the same root: panic. They are attempting to restore access, because access is how they confirm their own significance. Your absence forces them to confront a terrifying idea that they are not central to your life anymore, and that your world did not collapse without them. Here is the deeper truth most people miss. When you were fully accessible, the narcissist felt powerful. When you become selectively accessible or completely unavailable, they feel exposed, because access was never about intimacy. It was about regulation. You were regulating their emotions, their identity, their self-image. When you step out of that role, they are left alone with themselves. And that is something they have avoided their entire lives. This is also why they often attempt to rewrite history when they realize they have lost you. If they can't regain access, they try to control the narrative. They minimize you, discredit you, or pretend you never mattered. Not because you didn't, but because acknowledging your value without access would force them to admit a painful truth: that they lost something irreplaceable through their own inability to relate in a healthy way. Your growth makes this realization unavoidable. When you stop explaining yourself, stop defending your boundaries, and stop seeking acknowledgement from them, you remove the final illusion. They can no longer tell themselves that you are confused, weak, or dependent. Your stability becomes evidence. They cannot manipulate. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting their own lack of substance. And here is where your education turns into empowerment. You begin to understand that your worth was never determined by how available you were, how much you endured, or how much you gave. Your worth existed even when it was unrecognized, exploited, or ignored. The narcissist did not create your value by choosing you, and they cannot erase it by losing you. When they finally realize they have already lost you, it is not because you announced it. It is because they can feel it. They feel it in your indifference, in your lack of reaction, in your forward movement. They sense that the door they once walked through freely no longer exists. Not because you locked it in anger, but because you outgrew the room entirely. This is not a moment for pride or revenge. It is a moment for clarity. You see that access without respect is bondage, and availability without boundaries is self-betrayal. You learn that anyone who measures your worth by how much of yourself they can consume was never qualified to steward your life. And so when the narcissist realizes they have already lost you, what they are truly facing is not your absence, but your autonomy. Not your rejection, but your independence. Not your silence, but your self-possession. You are no longer something they can reach for to feel powerful. You are someone who belongs fully to yourself. That is not loss. That is liberation. When emotional independence threatens manipulation, the narcissist experiences a collapse that words can barely contain. This is because manipulation only survives where emotional dependence exists. The moment you no longer need their approval, reaction, explanation, or validation, the entire system they relied on stops functioning. Emotional independence is not loud. It does not announce itself. It is quiet, grounded, and deeply unsettling to anyone who built power through your emotional availability. A narcissist never bonds through mutual growth. They bond through emotional leverage. They study reactions. They memorize triggers. They learn which emotions pull you back, which doubts weaken your resolve, and which fears keep you tethered. For a long time they feel secure, not because the relationship is strong, but because your emotional world still revolves around them. When that stops, they feel exposed. Emotional independence removes their control without a single argument. This is why your calm is more threatening than confrontation ever was. Anger still proves attachment. Defensiveness still shows investment. Tears still suggest access. But peace communicates something final. You are no longer emotionally available for manipulation. And to a narcissist, unavailability feels like rejection at the deepest level. It forces them to confront the truth they have avoided, that their influence was borrowed, not earned. As you grow emotionally independent, something shifts inside you. You stop needing to be understood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding you. You stop explaining yourself to someone who twists explanations into weapons. You stop seeking fairness from someone who thrives on imbalance. This inner shift is invisible at first, but it is seismic. The narcissist senses it not through your words, but through your absence of emotional engagement. At this stage, they often escalate, not because they love you more, but because they feel power slipping away. Emotional independence threatens manipulation because it exposes the truth. Without your reactions, they have nothing to work with. No fuel, no leverage, no stage. And this realization is terrifying because it forces them into a void they do not know how to fill on their own. You must understand this clearly. Emotional independence is not coldness. It is clarity. It is the moment you realize that your emotions are sacred, not tools for someone else's regulation. When you stop outsourcing your emotional stability, the narcissist loses their role in your life. Not because you punished them, but because you outgrew the need they once fulfilled. This is also why they may accuse you of being heartless, distant, or changed. In a sense, they are correct. You have changed. You have become self-contained. And self-contained people cannot be controlled through chaos. The narcissist does not mourn the loss of the relationship. They mourn the loss of access to your emotional system. They mourn the end of their influence. Emotional independence dismantles manipulation because it removes urgency. You no longer rush to fix misunderstandings. You no longer panic at silence. You no longer chase closure. And without urgency, manipulation has no momentum. It cannot breathe. It cannot expand. It dies quietly in the presence of your stability. What makes this stage powerful is that it is irreversible. You cannot unsee what you now understand. You cannot unknow your worth. Once you realize that peace feels better than proving your point, there is no going back. The narcissist may attempt to reinsert themselves through nostalgia, guilt, or sudden kindness. But these attempts fail because they are aimed at a version of you that no longer exists. Emotional independence also rewrites your self-respect. You stop measuring your value by how someone treats you and start measuring it by how you treat yourself. This inner realignment terrifies manipulators because they can no longer define you. You become self-defined, and self-defined people cannot be controlled by confusion. When a narcissist realizes this shift has occurred, they feel obsolete, not angry, obsolete. And obsolescence is unbearable for someone whose identity depends on dominance. Your emotional independence is not an attack on them. It is a return to yourself. But in returning to yourself, you remove yourself from their control forever. This is the quiet victory no one teaches. You did not win by overpowering them. You won by no longer needing to engage. And that is why emotional independence is the greatest threat to manipulation, because it ends the game without a fight. When emotional independence awakens, it creates a disruption that a narcissist is never prepared for. This is because emotional independence does not announce itself loudly. It does not threaten. It does not argue. It simply withdraws permission. And permission was the only currency that ever gave the narcissist power. Once that permission is gone, everything they built their identity on begins to crumble from the inside out. A narcissist is not attached to people the way healthy individuals are. They are attached to access. Access to your emotions, your reactions, your explanations, your empathy, your guilt, your time, your spiritual labor, your mental energy. When you become emotionally independent, you silently shut down the supply line. And the narcissist feels this immediately, even if they cannot name it. This is why they become unsettled when you stop responding the way you used to. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are doing something new, something unfamiliar to their nervous system. Emotional independence removes predictability, and unpredictability terrifies anyone who relies on manipulation to feel safe. When you no longer need their approval to feel whole, they lose their position of influence. When you no longer fear their withdrawal, they lose leverage. When you stop seeking closure from them, they lose the final illusion that they still matter more than your peace. This is not defiance. This is graduation. Emotional independence forces the narcissist to face something they have spent their entire life avoiding themselves. As long as you were emotionally tethered, they could project their insecurities onto you. They could externalize blame. They could rewrite history. But once you detach internally, there is no longer a surface to project onto. The mirror disappears. And without a mirror, their identity destabilizes. This is why emotional independence often triggers sudden shifts in their behavior. They may become overly kind, suddenly reflective, nostalgic, apologetic, or even spiritual. But this is not growth. It is panic, dressed as transformation. They are not responding to love. They are responding to loss of control. And control to them feels like survival. Here is the deeper truth most people are never taught. Emotional independence is not indifference. It is self-governance. It is the ability to feel without being ruled by feeling. It is the ability to care without being consumed. It is the ability to walk away without hatred. And this level of inner authority exposes the narcissist's greatest weakness. They cannot access it themselves. A narcissist needs others to regulate their emotions because they never learned how to do it internally. When you regulate yourself, when you stop reacting impulsively, when you choose peace over explanation, you demonstrate a level of mastery they cannot imitate. And that mastery threatens the hierarchy they believed they were on top of. Your emotional independence sends a message without words. I am no longer available for dysfunction. That message destabilizes systems built on chaos. It rewrites power dynamics. It removes the stage they once performed on. And without an audience, manipulation loses its meaning. At this stage, they may attempt to provoke you, not because they hate you, but because they are desperate to confirm they still exist in your emotional universe. Anger, tears, confusion, accusations, any reaction will do. But your calm refusal to engage is interpreted as abandonment at the deepest level. And this is where the loss becomes irreversible. Because emotional independence does not fade, it compounds. Each day you choose self-respect over emotional labor. Your nervous system rewires. Each moment you choose silence over self-betrayal. Your identity strengthens. You no longer need them to change in order for you to heal. You no longer need their acknowledgement to validate your experience. And once that happens, they have already lost you, even if you are standing in the same room. Understand this clearly. Emotional independence is not something you do to a narcissist. It is something you become, and once you become it, the relationship ends energetically long before it ends physically. You are no longer controlled by their moods. You are no longer defined by their approval. You are no longer trapped in the cycle of hope and disappointment. You have stepped into internal authority, and authority cannot be manipulated. That is why emotional independence threatens manipulation. That is why your peace unsettles them. That is why your silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. They didn't lose you because you walked away. They lost you because you woke up.